Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I might even say a special edition of Mormon Stories Podcast, but the truth is, I say that every time. I'm John Dillon, your host, and today I could not be more excited to be doing something new and different and special. We are announcing a new project. We'll try it one time and see if it works. I think it will. It's called Mormon Stories Book Club. And what we're going to be doing is featuring a book. We're going to be having an interview with the author of the book. And what we are going to be doing is providing resources through Mormon Stories. This podcast is an interview, questions for a book group, other past episodes and other materials that we think you'll find interesting. And basically what we want to support is people having book clubs all over the world within and without Mormonism. And so we'll give you these resources. You guys can plan your book club. You can watch this interview. You can buy the book. I should mention, we'll talk about the book in just a second, but you can buy it. And you can host book clubs and even have the author through Skype or maybe even through personal visits, depending on the situation, actually have the author come to your book club, either virtually or in person, and have a great discussion about the book. So that's Mormon Stories Book Club. You can read more about it at mormonstories.org. But today we are going to feature as our inaugural guest on Mormon Stories Book Club, Joanna Brooks. Welcome, Joanna. Again, welcome back to Mormon Stories.
Thank you for having me back.
It's our pleasure. So here it is, the Book of Mormon Girl. Free press. It's out August 7th, 2012. I've read it. It's fabulous. It's a real gift to Mormons and non-Mormons. And I mean that sincerely. You can buy it you can buy it through Mormon Stories if you want. Maybe they'll throw a few pennies our way for helping to sell it through the Amazon Club or whatever. But you can also buy it at your local mom and pop bookstore. You can buy it at all the major bookstores. You can buy it online at Amazon.com. You can even buy it where, Joanna?
You can buy it at Deseret Book.
At Deseret Book. Woo! Thank you, Deseret Book. All right. So we're going to be talking about Joanna and the book today on Mormon Stories. So welcome again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to everyone in Mormon Stories world.
Well, it's a great community, and it's great to have you here. All right, so let's begin. Oh, something else that's kind of special. We've invited 5 special, maybe 6 special guests to our studio, and later we're going to allow them, they've all read the book, and we're going to allow them to ask some questions. So it'll be the first time other people, aside from yours truly, appear as interviewers in the video version of Mormon Stories. So those of you listening in audio, you can actually be watching this interview and see Joanna in all her glory on youtube.com/Mormon Stories. So
Glory.
Turquoise glory.
Yeah, always.
So I guess we should begin by noting the fact that in our first interview with you, we covered a lot of awesome territory. We talked about your childhood. We talked about, your time at BYU. We talked about your time after BYU and, kind of some of your faith struggles. Even talked about your marriage and kind of a little bit about the composition of your faith today. And so we're going to touch on some of that, but the truth is the book talks a lot about that stuff. So I want that to be the first place people are able to read.
It's in there.
Yeah, it's in there. This is a memoir. Right? So listen to that Mormon Stories interview if you want to hear that. We're going to talk about new ground. We're going to cover new ground here. So the first question that came into my mind, because I wonder if this is going to maybe help frame you a little bit, is just to ask, who are your heroes?
Ooh. You start with the easy one.
Yeah.
I have very random and odd heroes all over the place. I think my dad is one of my heroes, and he passed away about a month ago, I think, and after a long struggle with ALS, which is a very terrible disease. And he was a very observant, faithful Mormon man who served in a lot of callings, served as bishop in three different stints, and at his funeral, when I was talking about him, I was helping give all of his children spoke, and I just kind of asked everyone who was there, who he had mentored. He was a great mentor of young men, to stand up. And there were all these young men who he had mentored, and he had just shown up for people and been really consistent and had an eye on like passing it on to the next generation. And for him, it was really about young men. It was really about young men. So he's definitely someone I really have always idolized, even though our lives were really, different in some significant ways. And then talk about all over the map. Then there's a writer named Audre Lorde, who is an African-American feminist, lesbian, poet, philosopher, whose essays I always find myself turning back to when I need courage, which I need all the time. And so, there's Audre Lorde, my dad. I'm trying to think what else. Terry Tempest Williams was a hero of mine at a pivotal point, as was Carolyn Pearson. In the 90s, when I was like coming into my feminism at BYU, they were the writers I turned to find myself. And I think there are other more conventional Mormon liberal heroes like Eugene England. I have heroes among the September 6th like Lavina. Fielding Anderson's always been a hero of mine, and Margaret Toscano, so many.
Any sort of traditional civil rights kind of heroes? Kind of the activist in you?
See, I never really thought of myself as that tremendous of an activist. Really. I never thought of self-consciously modeling. I really have just always loved being in the thick of things. I think I remember seeing the movie Gandhi when I was in 6th grade. I don't know if that's normal. Like, I went to a theater with friends.
Yeah,
you're like 11. Yeah. Hey, what should we do this Saturday? Let's go see Gandhi. So I guess maybe that kind of is a key that I was different. I think in grad school I got to read just so much political philosophy, political history, and just think about this world stage of actors and what it means to really be in history and to play a role in history, help nudge history along. So there's just so many writers and thinkers. But I never thought of myself as an activist in that way.
So when you say being in the middle of it, you mean to be a positive force in helping move history along? Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't mind admitting that?
That I want to be a positive force in helping move history. Well, I want to be very, I don't know every day what the positive direction is. Right. I follow my heart, and I follow what I understand to be the teachings of Jesus Christ. Like, what would Jesus do? And sometimes really I feel just pushed in some directions. I just feel pushed. And it goes back from early. Like, my mom tells me, and my mom and I are very different people. I mean, my mom is like whip smart, like not a sort of traditional Mormon woman, was a stay-at-home mom her whole life, but like has a definite opinion on things, even though we are different. But she writes in her journal that when I was 6, we were having a conversation about like the millennium in the kitchen at home, and I was like, Mom, you mean people will be kind to each other and there'll be no more pollution? So for me from 6, like the millennium meant, justice, it meant kindness, it meant healing, it meant a renewal in ways that sort of map onto liberal sensibilities. So when I was in 4th grade, I talk about it in the book, when I was in 4th grade, I got to choose 2 term papers to write that year. One I wrote on Joseph Smith, the other I wrote on the Equal Rights Amendment. So my mom is like handing me the Phyllis Schlafly pamphlets. So I was just born this way. It's not like some affected, studied thing. It's just how I was born, made. It's how I came out.
Got it. So we talked a lot in our first interview, and the book talks quite a bit about how tough your BYU years, how glorious your Southern California youth conference sort of young men, young women experience was, and then how energetic and optimistic you came to BYU, almost like Dorothy coming to Oz, right? And then maybe you got a peek behind a metaphorical curtain or two and left BYU maybe not as the happiest camper. And then you struggled to try and find your way in the church, but then maybe for several years wasn't as active as you might have been.
Wasn't active at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll save,
Let's just be plain.
Right.
I did not go to church for a long time.
So you're not inactive for?
Probably 8 years.
8 years.
Yeah.
So, there's the sense that, you learn all the history, you have bad experiences with the church, you leave it, and then you're gone forever, right?
That's one of the storylines we tell each other.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote this book was because, especially when I was coming of age in my 20s, there were these two, and it was right during the 90s when there was, this incredible pressure and incredible focus on intellectuals and feminists as being dangerous. And the prevailing storyline at that time was you stay and you suck it up, or you just leave. There's just two stories. It's just one or the other, And life is so much more complicated. There are more stories than that, and they just don't get told enough. There are other ways of negotiating faith. It's not for everyone. For some people it is. I don't begrudge people whose paths go like that. But I hungered for a wider range of stories. I think that's one of the beautiful things that you've done. You've given us all these stories. So many different ways of living this faith.
Right. But this is kind of jarring for people. Like, there probably aren't a lot of historical facts you didn't learn by 24. And maybe some of the ways you were treated, villainized, maybe even you could say, could leave someone marred for life. And so someone might look at you as an enigma and say, why did you come back?
Mormon Enigma. I think that title's taken. But that would be really great for the book club, which, by the way, is just a really brilliant idea. I just think it's great to be supporting Mormon authors. And I know there are people like Matt Bowman and others down the line that are really going to be a great addition to this community. So thank you. Yeah, that is sort of an enigma. It's an enigma even to me, but that's faith,
So how did when did that spark come, and how
to come back?
Yeah, when did that first spark come, and then how did it grow? You're getting your PhD, you're at University of Texas. When did it start?
Here's the thing, and maybe this is just stubborn wrongheadedness, which I am completely capable of, but I always felt like I didn't leave the church left me. I was witnessing this very painful moment in Mormon history, and this moment had a body count. And I hated it. I hated seeing that happen in a faith tradition that I felt my ancestors had helped build, that my life had helped build, that I felt very connected to, that I felt just formed me from the core. And the question was, could I live out that moment? And, could I live out that particularly intense moment in Mormon history? Could anyone survive that? See, that was the thing that was such a pity about the early 90s, was that the idea you were either in or out. It was also that you were either dead or alive. There was no surviving the purge, right? They got to do that to people. They got to X you out of the Mormon community. And there was no ever coming back, They could stigmatize you and shame you, and you would go. And I was just stubborn, just no. It just didn't feel safe to come back for a while. And then I found good reason enough to come back and really exert my courage and say, no, this absolutely has always meant something to me. And even with its complexities and contradictions, it's, the spiritual dimension of my life has always been by far the most interesting. Let's continue the story. I hate it when the story ends it, and they won, and they killed you, and they eliminated all of these people, and it was over. It's not over. Not at all. I mean, that's what's so beautiful about this moment for people like me who remember the early 90s is Mormon feminism today is stronger. It's stronger, right? And that's because I'm not the only one. There have been other women who said, yeah, no, we're not leaving. It's not that easy.
What did you miss most when you were gone for 8 or 9 years?
Sundays were deadly quiet. I mean, they were always good quiet when you're living an observant Mormon life. You go to your meetings, kind of come home and you chill, take a long nap. But But there was an emptiness on Sundays that I just never felt right with. That spot in time was just never adequately filled. We tried other things. We tried to go to Quaker meetings, and Quaker meetings were great, but the Sundays were empty.
Were there parts of your religious and spiritual practice that you maintained even while you were away?
Oh, yeah. I always prayed the whole way through. Yeah, and prayed as a Mormon. Yeah.
Did your daughters have anything to do with you coming back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, even when I wasn't back at church, from the time they were little, I was always telling them, okay, teaching them things, teaching them. I was saying, come, me saying to them in the rocking chair. There's a scene in the book where I talk about how when I brought my daughters back to church, Ella, who was, just over 4 when I started coming back, she had never heard Come Ye Saints sung by a crowd. She'd only heard it sung by me, in the rocking chair at night. So one of the first meetings I brought her back to was, in the summertime, was around Pioneer Day, so we sang Come Ye Saints, and Ella, literally, spun her head around, could not believe that all these people knew this song, and she started, dancing in the aisle at church. We always sit in the overflow, because we're really underachiever Mormons. We're always about 5 minutes late, and, maybe the husband's there, maybe he's not, but she, leaped into the aisle of the overflow and, literally started dancing in church,
She discovered her people.
Yeah, because I had been trying to teach her all of this.
Half of her people.
Yes, she has 2 fine peoples. I'd been teaching her all of this in isolation. Even when we weren't going to church, I'd say, okay, we've got to do something today. I've got to teach you, you've got to learn how to pray, and I've got to teach you about God and the plan of salvation, and even by myself.
So a lot of people want to know why you wrote this book, kind of what your agenda was and what you were trying to accomplish. And I have to say that if I were to think about writing a memoir, I would be really self-conscious about the fact that I don't want to appear narcissistic, like I believe that my life was so important that everyone needs to know about it. And so that would psych me out as I was writing it. So to get over that, you kind of have to really have something you feel is important to say, other than the fact that you're a brilliant writer. So why did you write the book?
I'd always written from the time I was a kid. I had my first poem published in The Friend when I was 8,
Whoa, in The Friend.
Yes.
Nice.
Exactly. And had always loved writing and wrote all my way through BYU and never known how to write about Mormonism. There was this whole cohort of us who went through at BYU. We had these great professors like Daryl Spencer, and none of us really knew how to write about Mormonism, and there were just not that many books out there about Mormon people. Growing up, I read Little House on the Prairie books, and I read, the Jorgensen books that my parents would get at BYU, but there was at Deseret Book, but there was no book that felt like my life when I was a Mormon girl growing up. There was nothing. And getting to BYU, then there was Terry Tempest Williams' Refuge, which was huge, although it's really kind of it's partially about Mormonism. It's in the narrative if you know how to find it, and there are points where she'll say it explicitly, but still it's not about, here's how this feels to grow up Mormon. There was just nothing. There have been some fine books been published by some of the smaller Mormon presses, and so I was hungry. I was hungry for stories about us. And so I went away from writing for most of the years that I was not attending church. I was too uncertain and scared to write about Mormonism. I remember once a friend asked me to write this academic essay about Mormonism. I literally cried the whole time because I was scared, because who did they excommunicate? They excommunicated writers. They excommunicated people with books, that signature books on the catalog. They went right down, right? Yep. So I was scared. So I came back, and so the first thing when I started coming back to writing, I was writing a blog about interfaith family life, because writing is a great way to work out problems. So I was writing this really small circulation blog, just like friends. And one of my friends read it, said, you should see if you can get an agent. So there was an agent, and I was talking to this editor on the phone in New York City, and she's like, I love this book. You're a great writer. There's one problem. You're Mormon, and that's really weird, And I was like, oh my God, it is 2000 and what? And it is still unmentionably weird to be Mormon. That's just silly. That just means that there are not enough books by us yet. There's just not enough. And during all those years away, those 8 years away, I'd always been trying to explain, always talking about my faith and my Mormonism and telling friends how it was to grow up. And this, try to convey to them a sense of the really beautiful parts that I try to convey in the first few chapters of the book, the really magical parts of a Mormon childhood, and why you feel such a sense of connection. And then the kind of funky, clumsy, growing up, how Mormons teach their kids about sex, what girls' camp is like, how young Mormon women are kind of introduced the idea of polygamy, all of those funny human aspects of Mormon life. So all of the stories that I had been telling my friends around the dinner table, I decided I was just going to write those down. So I sat down for 2 years every Tuesday and just wrote all these stories that I'd been regaling non-Mormon friends with when I tried to explain how it felt to grow up Mormon. Because there was just that lack of understanding, so that an editor in New York City could still say, "You're so weird," because no one had told that story. I mean, think about today when you go to the bookshelf in a bookstore and you go looking for Mormon books, and it's like a Barnes and Nobles. What is there? You have Krakauer, right?
Bushman.
You have Krakauer, and then you have maybe some stuff from Deseret Book made it over, and then there's 10 ghost-written polygamy escapee memoirs, Where are the rest of us? Yeah. And mine's not the only story. There should be 50 more. There need to be 50 more. But I just felt like someone needed to start talking about how it felt to be a contemporary Mormon person in ways that humanized the faith. I know many people have tried that, and I wanted to give it a go too.
And the book does such a great job of, as you say, expressing what it feels like to be Mormon. I mean, I related so much to the youth conferences and the dance festivals and, young men's, young women's and campouts and all that stuff's there. Even the BYU experience, it was great. So that mission was definitely accomplished. What about, people want to just pin that kind of activist thing on you, that you've got some agenda, that you're trying to, speak up for this or that group or make changes or help influence this or that. Was any of that mixed up in there as well? As you said, your desire to kind of be in the middle of things and...
Well, clearly I was trained by feminist literary professors at BYU, and I've always felt really strongly about, I'm a literature professor. I love books. I love reading books, and, part of my feminist literary education was this, we were just indoctrinated, not by Mormons, but, that books matter, that life stories matter, and that just telling your story, even if it's weird and marginal and imperfect, is a humanizing act. And there's this one book in particular that influenced me by Audre Lorde, who I mentioned, a book called Zammy. It was published in the early 80s, and it was just her autobiography growing up as a queer child of immigrants in New York City. And it became a feminist classic just because it was so painfully honest about what growing up as a woman felt like. And there was something, even though she seemed to be the most marginal of figures, she was Black, but she was also the child of Caribbean immigrants, so she wasn't African American from the South. She was, queer, she was working class. Even though she seemed to be so marginal, there was something in the humanity of her telling. And I've taught that book so many times that humanized all the readers too, so that everyone could start talking more honestly about their lives. And that's sort of one of the articles of faith of, literature, is that when we just tell our stories, we create room for more stories to be told. We contribute to a vocabulary that humanizes, both the author and the audience. So that was the article of faith in the book. Just telling this story, even though it's not in many respects a typical Mormon story. In other ways, though, it is a typical story because it's an American coming-of-age narrative. Right. It's okay, how many people understand this? You grow up, you feel totally safe, you feel totally secure and loved, and you have all the answers, and then life hits you. And what do you do with that? What do you do with that? Whether you're Catholic or Jewish or gay and, whatever this is a very common experience, that loss of innocence. So hopefully, I thought, by narrating the fact that I'd had issues as a Mormon, that would humanize the tradition as well, hopefully. Right. That not everyone, I say in the introduction, usually only Orthodox stories get told on Sunday. Right? And that means that we only allow each other to tell Orthodox stories. So what if we just start telling our unorthodox stories and saying, yeah, that's Mormon too. people recognize that in us then. And that's the nicest, one of the nicest things I found, that non-Mormons recognize that struggle as something deeply human.
Yeah. I think I first started understanding Mormonism when I started reading Chaim Potok, the Jewish author. Do you feel like your book might even resonate with non-Mormons?
Oh, for sure.
And have any even reached out to you and said, "Hey"?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, because not the people. None of the people I've worked with to bring out this edition have been Mormon, but we cried reading it. We love, and there's been feedback. Yeah, people get it. We are not so different.
Exactly.
We are not so different.
And sometimes you need the lens of another faith to help you understand your own better.
When the other thing is something I just noticed as someone who's studied literature. This is my day job. I study literature. Is that most of the memoirs that made it, whether you're talking about from African American literary history, American Indian literary history, all these different groups, were from people who had been outside the community for a while and come back, or people who were on the margins of the community. Always, in every tradition.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
Jewish, everything. There's something about being sort of on the margins or having left that helps you see it differently in a way that translates. So yeah, this book I wrote it with just two different audiences in mind. I'm like, these are the stories I tell the non-Mormons I love. And there are a lot of non-Mormon people I have like really close friendships with. So I think about that audience in a very intimate way, So these are the stories I want non-Mormons to know about us, because I want them to know that we are human beings, so that we can act like human beings. We can be treated like human beings. We can treat each other like human beings, not like flat, orthodox cardboard cutouts, right? Yeah, and then I want to write it for people inside who feel alone, who feel like they're the only one in their ward or in their like class at BYU that has ever had a thought like this, and felt bad, that you're not alone. This is something Mormons have been struggling with all the time.
Well, you just prompted me to want to have you read a small section of your book, because it ties exactly to what you said. There's a chapter in here, a very special chapter called The Sealed Portion. And I debated whether or not to kind of have it be a spoiler, because it's such a powerful literary experience to read that chapter. But I wanted to capture you reading it. So for those of you with your books, pull out page 143. And Joanna is going to read
the part my mother doesn't like.
The seal. And my favorite part.
I love it, Okay. This chapter is called Sealed Portion. And it starts with a bracket. So the whole chapter is in between these brackets. Here are the parts of the story I do not want to tell, but I will for you, wayward Mormon boy or girl. I will for you, girl seeking. Because our stories are not told in sacred books. They're not told over the pulpit. They are not told by the prophets. No one says, I felt my church turn away from me, and it was a kind of death to me. No one says, I drove into the desert. I wandered around the city in the dark. I was alone, and it was cold, and inside me was desolation. No one says, I sat in the hotel lobby bathroom, my rib cage racked with sobs, until a stranger, insistent, knocked at the stall door, handing me a Kleenex and urging me to be strong. No one says, when my family treated me as a stranger, I preferred the company of strangers, and I walked among strangers, and what did I find but God in every one of their faces? No one says, I broke rules, I broke rules, I broke rules, I broke all the rules. That one, and that one, and that one too. Yes, I did. No one says I lay on the floor of the Venice Beach apartment and Parliament Funkadelic was on the record player, and my friend and I, we were looking at the ceiling, and I waved the smoke from the air with the back of my hand, and when he asked, help me understand what Mormonism means to you, I said, it is my first language, my mother tongue, my family, my people, my home. It is my heart, my heart, my heart. No one says any of these things, but they should, because no one should be left to believe that she is the only one. No one should be left to believe that she is the only Mormon girl that walked alone into the dark. No one should be left to feel like she was the only one broken and seeking. Or Mormon boy.
Give me that book back.
You know what?
Give me that book back.
You know what's nice? I got when I did the self-published edition, I got this email from a mom whose daughter had gone inactive, like a very observant, straight ahead. She's like, I ordered your book so I could try and understand her. And I was getting ready for my other daughter's wedding, and I set all my sewing aside, and I sat there and I just read it for a day straight so I could get my mind around. That was one of the best feedbacks of the book I ever got.
Love that. Love that part. Thank you. Thank you for reading that. One thing that humans like to do is put people in boxes. So I'm going to give a chance to unbox you. So for those who would want to paint you as something other than traditionally believing, we'll start there. We'll go through a couple boxes. Talk about maybe some of the ways that you actually are a traditional Mormon.
I believe in God, Heavenly Father, Heavenly Mother. I attend church. The atonement is one of the key ways I understand my life, my chances. I've experienced what I understand to be the grace of Jesus Christ, which is not a term we use a lot in Mormonism, but it's one that works for me. I attend church just about every Sunday when I'm not traveling now. Haven't always, but I do now. I teach Sunday school, teenagers, which is awesome. I feed the missionaries. I have the missionaries over for dinner, which is a form of torture. I don't mean it to be, but they look at my sweet husband and they just think he's got to convert sometime soon. And I just think it's...
Your husband, we haven't told the audience.
My husband's Jewish.
Okay.
Yeah. And he can talk to anybody. And right now there's an elder in our ward who really loves sports, and my husband really loves sports. And the last time we had him over to dinner, there was some sports talk.
David really loves sports.
He really loves sports. So we feed the missionaries. I teach my kids Mormon beliefs. They go to primary. I clean my ward building when I'm asked.
Prayer?
Yeah. Yeah, very Mormon prayer life. We're working on family prayer. We're better at it during the school year, as many people are, right? So, trying to think, anything else?
No, that's good.
I don't craft. Just not good at it.
All right.
Punctuation is my craft.
So then there's another group of people that want to just put you in the box of apologist, that
Right.
you're just a shill for the church, that you're just here to
Yes.
give the church a new face for PR.
Right.
And really, that's all you are, is just an apologist.
I would characterize myself as being fully aware of historical controversies and happy to leave them as controversies. I think Joseph Smith was a very complicated and flawed human being. I don't see him as I just wrote a post last week at my own blog about dealing with Joseph Smith's complicated history at Ask Mormon Girl, and kind of laid out the way I came into this more complicated understanding of Mormon history, and got a lot of very intense feedback from,
To put it lightly.
from people who are recovering from Mormonism, as they would call themselves, which respectfully I'd like to use the word they call themselves. I don't tend to be in the camp that sees Joseph Smith as a especially egregiously deviant mastermind of, I like to save that for Pol Pot, there are things I'm personally find myself at odds with about church policy. I measure my words in public very carefully because I'm aware that every generation of feminists prior to this one, they've managed to shame feminists by excommunicating us. So I have a full awareness and a robust, albeit personal, criticism of policies and things I disagree with, but I'm committed to the future of Mormon feminism, and it's more important to me that Mormon feminists stay in the game without sacrificing any of our integrity, but being as positive we can about the things we care about, so that we can pass the knowledge down to future generations. So I don't see myself as an apologist at all.
And you write pretty unflinchingly about the difficult things.
Yeah, it's so funny. Are you an apologist? I'm like, no.
No, the term is nouveau apologist.
Is
That
it?
was used today, actually, at Sunstones. Nouveau apologist. Don't
Well,
we love
here's
boxes?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, see, every time something is so interesting, because I write a great deal online, and you keep up with these online news cycles. You have to write to these cycles. And every time something spins around, I really ought to just check in with myself. I'm like, how do I just feel about this? If someone is being a real jerk in the way they write about Mormonism, I'm going to say they're a real jerk. If I gasp at something, if I gasp at a depiction of Mormonism, I'm going to say, that made me gasp. And most of the time I'm gasping because we're not being treated like human beings. Mormonism will not be able to critically process its own flaws and complexities until we are viewed as human beings. And we view ourselves as human beings who are accountable to civil discourse. And that's a two-way street, right? There's this cycle that's 150 years old of outsiders antagonizing us, which, reinforces and amps up our insularity and defensiveness, which contributes to people who want to ridicule us, round and around in circles, like chasing tails. What would it be like if we could enter public discourse as human beings and say, I really love some things about my faith, and I am critical, and my criticism is about the following subjects, and this doesn't mean I'm not invested in my faith, don't feel warmth towards my faith community, but part of my adult form of expressing my warmth and respect and responsibility is by being a thinking member of my tradition. So I'm wondering if that can happen for us. And I think the way it has to happen is by both demanding respect in the public sphere, not allowing ourselves to be reduced to caricatures, and by acting like human beings capable of participating in a full and open, robust public sphere conversation, which we don't always do. We still do a lot of hidey-hide. So that's the theory of the practice.
So chase the shame away, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Oh, the shame and fear are deep. And that's, one of the reasons to write the book and write pretty unflinchingly about, subjects that other people are ashamed to admit, like, I broke rules, was to move into the space of a little more openness, a little more humanity.
What would you say to someone who would say it's not loyal to air dirty laundry?
See, and that's deep. That is a deep and hard subject. Other minority communities, I've studied the history of their literatures and their politics, have similar experiences of outsiders using things from within the community to pick on the community. But the history of, for example, African American literature is a history of a people inoculating its own children, teaching them what they need to know about the tradition so that they can go out heads high and really represent. And I don't think we're there yet. We're getting there. We're at the beginning of a transition. We see it, where there is more openness happening about church history. It's time. It's way past time. We need to teach our children, our own dirty laundry. So where does that start? Does that start? Do we wait? Do we wait for them to get it at church? Or do we start now? Or do we just go out in public and act as if it is okay to understand that your faith is complicated and still love it? Just project that confidence. Just be like, yeah, oh, sure, totally complicated. Mind-bendingly so. Totally lovable.
And here I am.
And worth it.
Right.
And that's not so unfamiliar to people on the outside. We just come across so nervous all the time in public, so managed by the script. Right. Like if you veer from the script 1 inch, everything's gonna break loose.
Are we really more weird than Jews or Catholics?
Yeah, Catholics don't. I've had really fun interactions with Catholic readers, and yeah, we're weird, but
So, if you can't be put in the box of stereotypically traditional only, and you can't be put in the box of ex-Mormon or wolf in sheep's clothing, that nudges people to say, well, what is this middle way, as some people call it. And this could be a box too. You're like in the middle of the road where you might get squashed from both sides. You're.
That's how my inbox looks some weeks.
Yeah. And some people would say, look, in or out, sister, sign up or get out. But this middle way, what's that? You can't be a Mormon on your own terms.
But who said? I mean, here's the thing. And I like to leave my ward out of it. But I will say, I have a great congregation I attend, and when I show up, they say, "We're glad you're here. Can you come clean the church on Saturday?" You know what I mean? And I don't I don't go up during testimony meeting and hold forth on City Creek Mall or something, I don't know what Sunday's for, So I don't know, I've noticed we are very hard on each other inside, not only in Orthodox Mormonism, but also in, unorthodox forms of Mormonism. We are really hard on each other. We don't offer each other a lot of privacy or, that sense of reserve, that dignity. People get to have complicated spiritual lives, and that's okay. And I wonder about that. And I think it comes from the fact that, I don't know about you, but my dad had, interviews with me, on Sundays. Yeah, from the time.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And, no one else goes to church with people who are their neighbors and gets interviewed by their neighbors. No one else. No, that is very unique to Mormonism. So there is this sense that we have this right to sort of, what do you really, look, a lot of us have really complicated inner lives, and there's beauty in that. That's okay. That's okay. Is that okay? Can we create that shelter for each other in unorthodox Mormonism of all places? Can we create that shelter for each other? We're like, hey, if you show up for me and I show up for you, I'm going to put my arm around you. It's going to be okay. We don't need to figure this all out right now. We just need company. And some stories to keep each other entertained. I just wonder if that's something we can do in unorthodox Mormonism. So we're not beating up. Because, there are, while we are beating each other up with these kinds of questions, the world is running away. There are people are making millions of dollars on caricatures of Mormons. Right. And I love the Book of Mormon musical, right? I didn't like Krakauer's book. There are people who are making a career on us, and we are beating each other up on Facebook. Right. Hello, it's start writing our own stories. Get our stories out there at every point on the orthodoxy spectrum.
And yet, to speak about Mormonism in terms of orthodox or unorthodox, I almost wonder whether you could find discussions like that prior to 2005. In Judaism, it's hundreds, 100, 120 years old, right? But in Mormonism, it's what? Unorthodox Mormon? Yeah. Does that exist? Where is that in the discourse? Mormon or outside, extra Mormon, right?
Right. Well, and yet there has been this innovation in the last 5-7 years. And I've used those terms, and I've made a point of using them. And I actually think they're, in as many ways as boxes are not helpful, boxes are also sometimes fairly useful. So, the terms we are left with otherwise, we needed to innovate. We had anti and X. My editor asked me to add a few new chapters. If you read the self-published edition, there's a few new chapters in this edition. And one of them talks about the experience of starting writing again. And it was at first it was just this email inbox full of just hate. It's you're an ex-Mormon, anti-Mormon, wolf in sheep's clothing. And I was just it's rocks, being thrown. It's not even close. Clearly there's a vocabulary gap. We have not had the language to describe what's happening. So it's just so much of the important work that you're doing, and a little of what I try to do in the book was to tell a story that people could say, I'm not like that, I may be more like that. Maybe there's some other flavors of this story, We need that vocabulary. It also helps humanize us to the outside world. Every time I go on some, random media thing, I ask my Facebook friends and my friends or whoever, and we're what is the most important thing to say? They're tell them we're not all alike. And, and you go out into this world, and you're in some media venue, and you realize there are 99% of the nation's conversations are happening without Mormons in them. And that's sobering, and that if you're the Mormon that shows up finally and has the conversation at CNN or at, PBS or wherever, one of the first things they want to know are, really, you're not all alike? No, we are not all alike. Oh, phew. Like the rest of the world wants to know.
Well, the first question is, do you make furniture? And then the second question is...
Use nails? Yeah, no. Couple wives? Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that Judaism, as I understand it, dealt with this is they kind of schismed.
Right.
So they have ultra-Orthodox, they have Orthodox, they have conservative, they have Reform, they have Reconstructionist, and they just kind of split in 5 or 10 different ways, right? And some would say, well, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to create a Reform Mormonism? Are you trying to schism? Go start your own version. Don't taint us traditional Mormons with your polluted, middle way liberal version, right?
Yeah. You see, I suspect that there have always been Reform Mormons, or if you want to call it that, because there's no such, there's always been a wider range of belief and feeling than we cop to. And I think post-correlation especially, and in the 90s especially, Orthodoxy closed in institutionally pretty hard. And that's when you started seeing this plot line take place. Either you're in or you're out, right? I mean, I grew up with people who were different kinds of Mormons, a little bit odd, there's been a bandwidth. We're a human community. People have left in waves at different points in Mormon history. There have been different, exoduses out of the tradition by groups of intellectuals. But I think there is capacity that we surrendered. We were scared out of at some point. And that there is space, not to go necessarily marching in with a banner and an agenda, but if the church matters to you and you feel good there is capacity. We don't have to be quite as scared maybe as we were 20 years ago to take our place in the pew in all of our imperfection and just be. And I could be totally wrong. I could be totally wrong.
No.
But, and I talk about in the book how writing helped me feel like I could take my place in the pew again.
Yeah, not just a capacity, but a history of it. You read about the 1920s and 30s about how apostles would disagree with each other publicly over issues like evolution and the age of the earth and science. They would go at each other, and somehow we've lost our ability to have a wider breadth of perspectives.
Right. So part of what's felt important to me in this book, but also just in some of the writing for the internet I do, is to say Mormons are capable of disagreeing. We are. There are people I will totally disagree with on Twitter who will put a one-arm Twitter hug around me, Yes, we can. And sometimes that takes Mormons like you and me not acting ashamed, not acting afraid, not acting like we have something to feel guilty about. Because we feel it. We really felt it after the 90s, right? It's like, I'm bad. No, you're not bad. Not bad. You're not bad. Head high. We can disagree. We are a robust, complex, evolving faith tradition. Really rich, kind of kooky, really inspiring. And we have the capacity to work out problems. And unless we're brave, we're going to lose that capacity.
So how do you balance your, I don't want to say activist impulse, but your impulse to kind of be in the thick of things and to help inch us towards positive progress? How do you balance that with some of the very Mormon traditions of obedience and respect for authority? How do you balance those things?
Let me think if there's a good story in the book. I don't know if there's a story in the book that speaks to that.
It feels like that's more what you're doing now than what you did back then.
Yeah, well, I think things change when you become a mother. When you move into a certain phase of your life and you're like, I'm showing up, I'm an adult, I'm here to contribute with the gifts that God gave me. And the gifts God happened to give me are really funny that they came in a Mormon package, I'm like a mouthy, not totally mouthy, I'm like a, wordy, writing, brainy, non-crafty. I'm kind of an independent-minded Mormon woman. Is that so new? I don't know, but it was funny to be born at that certain time in history with that combination. But I'm here. These are my gifts. What can I do with them? That's what I got. This is what I have to give. What do you want? Yeah.
So let's talk about feminism.
All right.
Like, what's important to you? Why is that important? How is it relevant? And how does it overlay with Mormonism of all things?
Right. One of the best parts of writing the Book of Mormon Girl was telling a Mormon feminist story, showing that this faith is so capable of raising independent, thinky girls and women who are taught from the time we're young to, the glory of God is intelligence. We're taught to study the scriptures. We're taught to seek our own answers. We're never taught that you can't be like Joseph Smith in terms of being a 14-year-old with questions and going to the woods and praying. Like that inquiry, that take it to God inquiry, that's gender neutral. That is taught to all of us. And that hunger for knowledge, how it unfolds over the course of a Mormon woman's lifetime, is something I really tried to show in the Book of Mormon Girl. The curiosity, and then going to BYU and finding this legacy I'd never known about. I'd never heard of Eugene England before I went to BYU, or Lowell Bennion, or I did not come from a Sunstone Dialogue household. And then that collides with certain adult gender role obligations that we've emphasized increasingly in the last part of the 20th century, that Mormonism has emphasized increasingly in the last part of the 20th century, especially from the time of the fight against the ERA, Proclamation on the Family. There's been this hardening of this sense of what a proper Mormon woman does and how that fits into theology.
Yeah, it wasn't always this way, right? Don't we have late 19th century, early 20th century examples of women actually being surprisingly
There's a big array of data in Mormon women's history, and a lot of it's really surprising. And there's all these sorts of nuggets and tidbits of Mormon history I try to sneak in whenever I write for non-Mormons so that they know our story is complicated. Our story is complicated. I do think, there's this moment that Mormon Stories listeners know about called correlation in the 30s, 40s, 50s, especially 50s onward. And I think correlation had some impacts on gender. I think gender got correlated too. But again, this is something we probably need to have like 3 academic conferences about and sit down and just figure it out.
Yeah, sure.
But in the book, I just tried to show how very natural it was as a Mormon girl who had been taught to think and value herself, to question things. And that's the spirit of Mormon feminism. It's like I was raised in a faith that nurtured that seeking part of me, and it will never die. I will continue to seek. And then it will brush up against and even butt heads with other parts of the tradition that I come into as an adult. And how I manage those contradictions and stay true to that original seeking spirit inside of me in the community of other Mormon women who share this. Like, that's the essence of Mormon feminism. Mormon feminism is just a commitment to other Mormon women that we are going to care for each other as we figure this out.
But how do you do it? Like, all male leadership, some could say, well, feminists who stay in the church are being the Uncle Toms of, Mormon women because you're empowering the institution that is holding you down, So how do you go every Sunday and go to General Conference or watch it and see the wave of wonderful men from Idaho and Utah? And how do you, most importantly, raise 2 daughters in a tradition that's sort of maybe a lot of the stronger feeling feminists out there would say this is a dangerous place to raise daughters?
That is not an easy question to answer, and being part of a Mormon feminist community or identifying as a Mormon feminist means means acknowledging lots of different women answer that question in lots of different ways. And even the way we answer that over the course of our lifetimes may change, For me, right now, there's no question that all male chain of command, separate from the question of priesthood, some of the discussions that are happening now among Mormon feminists and feminist allied Mormon men are, how do we understand priesthood? Is it really necessary for the bureaucracy to be entirely male too? there's so much space for us to think carefully and critically about things that matter in Mormon life. You know, why is the membership clerk a gendered office? You know, like there's a lot of space for us to think critically, and it's going to take time. We just know that about Mormonism. It's young and it's slow. So, you know, for me, Mormonism is a faith in which I've experienced so much goodness and taken so much strength from it. But at the same time, it's a challenge. It absolutely is a challenge. And I just feel a tremendous amount of solidarity with other Mormon women, Mormon feminists, and a willingness to stay in and try and work it out with this community, and hope that good things will come. My daughters, though, you know, I mean, it's interesting because they're growing up, when they go to temple and they go to shul, they have all female rabbis and teachers. And they're growing up in a world where they're growing up in a household with an egalitarian marriage, which I think a lot of Mormon households these days are having egalitarian marriages increasingly. And they may be less patient than me. And I would like to think that I could convince them to stay in the game, but they will be less patient than I am.
So there was a time when the three great enemies of the church were declared as gays, feminists, and intellectuals. We've talked about the thinky, brainy stuff. We've talked about women's issues. And of course, the LGBT issue is something you've also been quite vocal about. Why?
Yeah, you know, I don't know where that started. I think I mentioned in the book that, you know, the first time I really met gay people was, of course, at BYU. Met openly gay people who were not openly. They were, you know, sub-honor code gay, you know. And was just very curious, but was not like an automatic supporter of same-sex marriage from some early. I mean, gay issues were on my, if you remember the student review, I think gay issues were on my radar from like 1991. But, you know, I think it was just because I had actually met gay people at BYU. I was just like, oh, wow. That's a challenge. What does that look like and feel like? Just curiosity. But it became more important to me in the late 90s when the church started getting actively involved in the political fight against same-sex marriage. And that just made me sad. Just basically very sad. Again, I wasn't a huge supporter of same-sex. I just like, oh.
I think the book said you cried for...
When Prop 8 happened, I cried for like 6 months. Yeah, the book has a full chapter on Prop 8 from the point of view of someone living in San Diego, California, just kind of seeing it unfold.
I think it said you couldn't enter a chapel without crying for a while. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was hard.
Yeah. Those were some times. There's a scene in the book everyone likes to get me to talk about that, you know, I'll let you get there on your own, but where I actually destroy, everyone's smiling. I actually take like Prop 8 materials out of a church building. So I'm just telling you it's in there.
It's very subversive.
I don't know if it was, yeah. I had to write a book club guide for it for like the rest of the world for the book. And one of the questions I said, do you think this was a cowardly or a courageous act? And I don't know that I know. I think that's an honest question.
And just really break it down and be candid, to the traditionally believing Mormon person or non-Mormon person, evangelical Christian, whatever, who says homosexuality is a sin and the Bible condemns it, and these people, it will destroy traditional marriage if we infect it with their nastiness. What's your argument against those? Just a couple, a minute on that.
I don't argue about it. I just don't. Mostly what I find myself caring about is equality under the law. That's a political stance I'm willing to take. Something in my heart just makes it impossible for me to demonize people who I love, and I have close gay friends, and so I just can't really even participate in that kind of an argument. It just doesn't make sense to me. I will make an argument about the fact that all people should enjoy equal protection and equal access under the laws of the state. And I know that puts me in tension with the church's own investment, but I think we've seen a dialing back of the church's investment in the politics of same-sex marriage. We've tracked it really carefully, just observantly, just not trying to be, cagey or anything, but just watching state by state as the question is revisited.
4 years later, right?
Right. And there's not been anything that has matched Proposition 8. And that's a relief to me.
So when I'm going to say 2 words, and I want you to register for us what comes to you emotionally and intellectually when I say the 2 words. All right?
All right.
Ready? Mormon moment.
Almost over.
Followed by whoo.
Yeah. No, it's been kind of nutty, huh? Yeah, it's the moment in which America woke up and said, we know nothing about Mormons. No. It's been a very interesting time. I've enjoyed it, but I think it will be great when it passes.
What's it about? Why us? Why now?
Well, I mean, clearly it's Romney's candidacy. Clearly. And I think why us is because we're this puzzle.
Okay, wait. Romney's dad ran for president, and there wasn't a Mormon moment then.
You're right.
Right? It was like a non-issue. So I don't mean to argue with you, but
No, you're right.
Is there something else? A maturing or a time element or a critical mass?
We're larger than we were back then. I think there's also something about the 24-hour news and content cycle that the internet's created that has opened up dimensions of human experience. Everything from reality TV to the internet makes everything searchable. Even I think when George Romney ran, there was this idea of decorum and of privacy.
Yeah.
And that there are matters that are maybe a bit odd, but we don't dwell on them. We don't want to pry into them. But that's all out the window now. Everything is fair game now. And in the face of that, Mormonism maintains this reserve, right? Still social insularity, still things we do not want to talk about ourselves in public. Some of them by covenant not to talk about them. And that makes us an irresistibly curious object. Our own insularity feeds the curiosity as it feeds antagonism.
Right. And so what's it been like for you as a Mormon who's proud to be a Mormon to see your faith under the microscope? What have you felt? How do you rate the coverage?
I think it's really evolved. I think the coverage has really evolved. One thing that's been sad, and I write memoir, and I've also written online quite a bit, as I think we've just sort of referenced, and I don't expect anyone reads that, but I write for a magazine called Religion Dispatches, and I've written about Mormonism 2 or 3 times a week, generally about Mormonism, but usually about faith and politics, 2 or 3 times a week for the last 2.5 years. And via that opportunity, and it's a non-Mormon publication. It was founded by the Ford Foundation at one point, so it's sort of this public sphere, secular, but religious. And it's journalists read it. So one thing that's happened over the last couple of years, I've noticed, and I've always tried to sort of write about representations of Mormons along the way. Here's the good ones, here's the bad ones, here's when someone got really wrong, without being defensive or goofy, just saying yeah, that was not cool. And when something that's really gratifying is just, I know that I've had journalists say to me, I wrote this piece and I thought, what would you think? And that made me feel really good, because then, so there's this conscience now that there are Mormons in the room. When you write about us, we are not this species of creatures living, in a zoo somewhere past the Rocky Mountains. Don't know if they're the ones with plural wives or not. Mormons are actually in the room. They're in the discourse community of people who, produce content. So I think there's been, and I'm not saying I contribute to that at all. I think overall, though, we've seen the coverage get better. I actually think we've gotten off pretty easy.
Yeah. For July, right? I mean, it may heat up in
after
August
the
and
nomination.
September. There may be an
We'll see.
October surprise, right?
We'll see.
Yeah.
But I think we've been generally treated, with some cases, and it's easy to focus on those. I think generally the quality of coverage has been getting better and better. And you've seen lots of Mormon voices poke through. Spencer Fluman in the New York Times was fabulous, the New York Times sampled lots of, Russell Fox and Kathleen Flake, people that they should be talking to, and non-Mormon scholars of Mormon experience too. The Nation's paper of record, which for the last year and a half hosted a number of really subpar articles about us, is finally starting to get Mormon voices in the pages of the Week in Review, which is great.
Yeah.
That's great.
I've been surprised how many journalists that I've spoken with say, we don't want to take cheap shots at you guys.
No, exactly.
We want to treat you guys as we would treat Jews or Catholics with respect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, does Romney have a chance? And if not, how much of that is his Mormonism or not?
There's a new poll out today from Pew Forum that shows at least a third, still have no idea what his religion is. Okay, so while we are totally obsessed with it, a third of America doesn't even care, which is so important to remember.
Yeah.
And that among those who do know, 60% says it makes no difference. So it will be a hard case to make that Mormonism was a negative factor in Romney's candidacy. I think the way Mormonism has impacted his candidacy is far more subtle. I think his feeling of vulnerability as a Mormon has crafted or contributed to his very stiff demeanor, his highly managed demeanor, which many people find off-putting, has made it difficult for him to connect. A couple of weeks ago, the LA Times was like, he should talk more about Mormonism, makes him human. And the campaign is absolutely not doing that. They won't let anyone get close to them. The reporters and the press junket say. So Mormonism has indirectly shaped his candidacy by making him so exactly as we are perceived to be, hiding things.
Buttoned up, formal,
and clearly defensive. And how do you reconcile that with like the rumors about the weird 19th century beliefs or the temple practices? So it contributes to the mystery, right? It builds the mystery, so buttoned up and yet maybe weird behind the buttoned up rather than open. But no, we watch the numbers in our house every day, and it's not looking great for him this fall, but we've got a few months.
Yeah.
But by the numbers, it's not looking great for him. But I don't think we should blame it. I don't think we will be able to blame it on his Mormonism.
Right. Is there a part of you that would be proud to have a Mormon in the White House?
Mitt Romney reminds me of my male relatives, like in good ways, in sweet ways. When I look at him, I don't see, some people see this real, threatening. And there are things about him I certainly don't agree with politically, and things about his characteristics and, his personal touch that that don't give me warm fuzzies. But I see Mormon men I know who've given their lives to service and been up through the chain of, stake president and heavy responsibilities. And so I have a huge affection for that.
Are there any virtues, are there any Mormon virtues that you see in him that you think would serve well in the office?
That's hard. I mean, I do think he thinks he's doing what's right. One of the things that I've tried to write about consistently, and we're way off topic from the memoir now, but that's fine. And I write for the internet, is the ways in which his own sense of the importance of hierarchy and of being loyal to the big institutional agenda and of covering the people who are going to give you status have shaped his agendas, economic and foreign policy. So we have this Mormon candidate, but there's virtually no faith imprint anywhere in his policy other than gay marriage and abortion. There's nothing Mormon about his agenda, which is good for many people.
What about honesty and hard work and self-sufficiency and independence and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that kind of stuff?
Oh, I love that story too. The may look different from the point of view of Latin American saints.
Right. Yeah. All right. So you probably are being called on by more journalists than any other Mormon at this time to speak for Mormonism. You're kind of a go-to spokesperson. I mean, you've been on Krista Tippett speaking of faith. CNN did a feature. You've appeared on television as kind of a pundit spokesperson, right? Different networks all over the place. What's that like?
It's been weird.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's important to demystify how media works. Because I've learned some things. 'Cause I come from this academic world that's very slow. People are like, we're going to throw a conference next year. Can you come? You know, and you're like, oh, I got pregnant in the interim. I can't make it. You know, I was like, it's so slow. But, you know, here you have a 24-hour news cycle, you know, a 24-hour content cycle, internet, video, you know, radio, newspapers, and they need stuff. They need stuff. So what does a producer do when they're trying to fill a seat on their show? They do what we all do. They Google, you know, and writing for the internet about Mormonism 3 times a week for the last 3 years, you know, you get found. And so they come, you know, they read your perspective and they try and figure out perspective is the key word. And if you listen, and so the thing I compare it to is, because I've never positioned myself as a spokesperson, because that's not right. It's not who I am. You know, it's sort of like if you're listening to an NPR story about the auto industry, you know, and one of the sources might be the PR guy for Chevrolet, you know, for General Motors. And then someone might just be the auto industry analyst who works at the auto industry trade rag. Like, that's me. I'm just the analyst. I'm just someone who's always watching and observing and saying from experience, interpreting from experience and translating a little bit, comparing. You know, since I have sort of a background in, you know, American studies, I can put us in a historical context and a cultural context. So I'm a translator and a commentator. And so when a producer is trying to get a handle on an unfamiliar subject, they want the analyst. They know what they're going to get from PR, but they also want a translator and an analyst. And just by the way the internet works, and the internet's changed everything, has made voices like mine more accessible. That's it. That's to demystify. That's how it happens, you know. And then you do one radio show and you put it up, and you know. And then the producers, they all talk amongst themselves. It's crazy. There are like people for a living who just procure radio guests. You know, I need someone because it's going all the time. They need someone on 9 a.m. You know, Robert Jeffress spouted off his mouth again, and they want someone to talk to St. Louis at 10 a.m. tomorrow for the talk show. You know, can you do it? And you're like, duh. And it's the craziest experience because you really don't say anything that dramatic. I ended up teaching the plan of salvation to St. Louis one day. You know, because you know, we're going to the phones. Like that's the worst thing that ever happened. We're going. You know, they're talking to you. Yeah. You know, yeah, trying to sound human and humanize Mormons and humanize the experience and not just speak insider speak, but speak in a language I'd use like with my in-laws, right? People I care about and trust, but who are not from us and don't always buy everything we have to say. Right. Mm-hmm. You know, and then we're going to the phones, and that's when you don't go to the phones, because then random, don't you believe that Jesus and Satan are brothers? And then you back up and you find yourself, you know, on your cell phone explaining the plan of salvation to the city of St. Louis, you know? It's very random.
I remember traveling to Houston, and it was like a day after you had a radio debate with, or appearance with some evangelical guy, and he had been a little bit rough with you, I had heard. Oh,
I was on my phone. I usually, the only quiet space in my house is my Prius in the garage, so I'm on my cell phone in my Prius. And, you know, while like the kids are going to school, you know, David's walking to school, we live close to school, and that was actually friendly. They had Pastor Jeffress on, like the segment before, and I had no idea until I checked my email, and someone said on Facebook, I'm listening and Pastor Jeffress is on and Joanna Brooks is going to join him next. I was like, he's the one who said the very provocative, you know, Mormonism's a cult stuff last fall. So I said my help me Jesus prayer, you know, and sat in my Prius. Ended up just having this really joking, robust conversation with the host. And he was a very conservative talk show host, and he was teasing me for being an Obama liberal, and I was letting him tease me. And every time we went to commercial, he was like, this is great. Can we keep you on 2 more segments? You're really acting like a human being. Yeah. And I said, yeah, okay. Sure. It's hot in the Prius. Can we hurry? You know. But so I say that just to demystify the way that this happens. You know, that really, you know, there is a hunger for content about Mormonism, and there's also a hunger for perspective and analysis. And by virtue of the way the industry works, being findable snowballs. And producers also talk amongst themselves about who can make good tape. So if you can speak in ways that are engaging, they'll say to another producer who's hungry, and literally they're filling their programs sometimes 15 minutes before.
Yeah. And your appearance on Krista Tippett's On Being or Speaking of Faith was like, for me, it was like this moment, because I had been listening to Krista Tippett for years, loving her work. And when you came on, it was like the hair was standing up on my arms and my eyes were watery and the chills. Everyone that I talked to said that you were such a beautiful spokesperson for us. So I want to tell all the listeners, all the viewers, to go listen to that interview.
Sweet.
That was a good one.
We'll
put a link up to it.
She does great work.
She's good.
You know, and I just tried to tell the same story I tell in the book, which is like, here is who we are as individuals. I think one of the things, I actually taught a Relief Society lesson, I subbed in Relief Society about sharing the gospel. You know, and I know they're giggling. Peanut Gallery's laughing. I laugh too, it's really hilarious. But you know, I believe very strongly that by telling our own story as individuals and admitting our flaws and imperfections, we often express what is best about our faith. You know, and this is not the way necessarily we're raised to talk about it. We're raised to remember a missionary and stick to the script and say it in a very particular way, and people can't hear that. Yeah. Non-Mormons don't hear that. It bounces off their head. Right. It just does. So if we just narrate it as imperfect as each of us is, I think so many Mormon lives are really beautiful.
Yeah, tune in.
And yeah, Mormon people, I think, really live their faith and really live the challenge of faith. All of us, even the unorthodox ones.
So one last question about being, well, a couple more questions about being a spokesperson. Then we're going to get to the questions.
Which I'm not.
Right, right. But here's the deal. My own sister, love my sister. She said, I don't like Joanna speaking for us. She doesn't represent us.
It's true, I don't.
But you are, sort of.
I'm the auto industry analyst.
That's how you see it. Mm. Yet, you've admitted you like to be in the middle of things. You've got feminist proclivities and pro-LGBT proclivities. And so you're not a dispassionate, objective outside analyst. You're a in the thick of it, also trying to help positively move things forward analyst. Is that tricky?
But the questions never present themselves that way in actual life. The question is, St. Louis wants someone on at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Will you come talk about, have you tried the church? The church doesn't respond to our emails. PR's busy, really busy.
So, or they don't want to.
Or they don't want to. And there's things they can't even begin to say. They don't want to talk about anything dealing with politics, which is wise. You know, and yet do Mormons have thoughts about politics? Yeah. You know, I think the only answer to, and I know, let's be like, oh, who do you think you are to talk? More voices. That's the only answer. And I am excited for more voices. Like, you know, I co-wrote a piece with Tamara Kelmsley, you know, who has different political views than me, but who is also a Mormon feminist, that we did for a news service that serves the Islamic-speaking world, not the Islamic-speaking, the Islamic world. You know what I mean? Like, there just need to be more of us doing this. There just need to be more. I mean, you know, 5 years ago, we're moving from this model in Mormonism where we are so used to having everything done with the institutional imprint, right? Either it's LDS Church official or it's not right. You know, we haven't yet developed a robust independent sector like many faiths have. Many faiths. A professor of Jewish studies can talk about Judaism and not be perceived as the spokesperson for Judaism, but as an analyst, a perspective, a participant, you know, an affiliate, you know. And we're just barely getting to that idea. We are so used to, you know, part of our insularity has been trying to assess whether a media coverage of Mormonism is good for us or bad for us. And usually if the media product comes from the church, we know it's safe, and if it doesn't, it's not safe. We just need about 20 more flavors to present the full array of Mormon humanity. So, yeah, I know I don't represent everyone, so y'all get busy. Come join me. I'll help if you want in. Like,
it gets tiring, right? To to always have to answer.
It's been an adventure. It's been really great. And I hope I can convey a sense of how carefully I think about what I do. Like I was on BBC, and again, just by storytelling, I was on BBC, did a news hour on us, and they came here, and it was me and Michael Otterson were the two voices on. We did 2 hours back to back, and one of them was literally for the world. And I was literally sitting there, like very prayerfully saying, what does Kenya need to know about Mormonism? Like I take the responsibility that comes with this adventure really seriously. But at the same time, I recognize it's totally accidental, and there is room for 25 more voices, and we need those voices because some people will not hear it from headquarters. They will not hear it that way. They will not understand us as human beings that way.
Is it ever hard? And I can think of 2 ways it's hard. Hard, sometimes feeling the burden or the pressure or the responsibility of being on that edge, and then hard because you get attacked from the inside. Talk about each of those hards. Not too bad?
Of course, but you don't want to be like, oh, woe is me, I wrote a book and people are reading it. I'm so grateful. I think it's just like a wonderful, I'm so grateful. I just want to be useful. I always wanted to be useful. I didn't see a way to be useful for a long time, So I found a way to be useful right now. And maybe it's not perfect, but it is, nudging along the Mormon project in some direction. I trust that I'm not in charge and someone else is, and it's going to be fine. Oh, and yeah, I get beautiful email, and I get the chance to connect with beautiful people, non-Mormon and Mormon, who I just love, and I feel so lucky. And then I get this one, who is raising your children? You are promoting homosexuality. Have you read the Old Testament story of Jezebel? You should. Mormon women don't talk about Jezebel enough, but you need to study that story. I get. But on my day job, I've learned that when I'm making everyone a little bit uncomfortable, then usually I'm doing it right. Right?
But does it ever sting?
Oh, of course. Of course.
But you're stubborn.
Totally. Totally stubborn. And there are women I reach out to and I check in with, who I say, okay, you tell me. You know my heart. You tell me. I have people I have leaders I check in with. Women I look up to. I'm like, okay.
How'd I do?
What's your advice? You know my heart. Am I doing all right or not?
Come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day. 'Tis better far for us to strive our useless cares from us to drive to the sand joy. Your hearts will swell